Drop the brace.
Hello guys, it's Ryan here and welcome to my Kalphite King guide. I'm going to try to go as in-depth as I can, going over all the different types of classes, phases, and scenarios associated with Kalphite King. This probably isn't the 100% best method or guide that you'll find, but I've done over 1,000 Kalphite King kills and these are the methods that work best for me. I'm going to have drygore setups as well as non-drygore, but the backing footage is going to have drygore in it. I'll go over what's different and what's the same, so it really shouldn't be that different. So let's get started. The first part of this guide is going to be setups. When gathering your team, you're going to want to determine who will be doing what before you gear up. The first class I'll be going over is the tank. Before you get into the gear, make sure that insight is on and that all other members of your team have it off. This could severely fuck your team when it comes to taking a green attack. Here's my personal setup for tanking with drygores. As you can see, I use bandos with dual wield rapiers and the best defensive bonuses I can get in each slot. Obviously with this setup, as well as the others, you can downgrade or upgrade your gear accordingly. Torva and Tetsu would be good alternatives, but I wouldn't suggest tanking unless you're in 70 plus defense gear. This is the action bar I use. This is the tank setup if you don't have drygores. If you don't have drygores and you're tanking, you shouldn't be worrying about damage that you're doing, which is why I have Ganodermic, an Arcane, and a Master Wand. This is the action bar I would use. Note how I have mostly defensive abilities on it. This is because you're really not going to do that much damage, so you really want to focus on surviving and focusing on defensive abilities, and let the rest of your team focus on damage output. The next role I'll be covering is the Provoker. It is imperative that if you are the Provoker, you always have a shield on. If all goes according to plan, the tank will get green and it will be your job to save him. You are arguably one of the most important people on the team. If you're new to Kalphite King, you're going to want to have a backup Provoker, since if you die, your whole team can possibly die as well. It just depends on how early you die. This is the bar you might want to use if you're a Provoker. The last class of fighter you'll need for the Kalphite King is the Attacker. With drygores, it's going to be almost identical to the Provoker, except you'll be using an offhand drygore and not a shield. This is the action bar you should use. If you don't have drygore, you're going to want to tribrid with Void using a Zami Spear, Crystal Bow, and Chaotic Staff. I'll go over which combat style to use on which phases later in the guide. You may want to swap out the Crystal Bow with the Royal Crossbow. I've personally never even used one, so I don't know if it would be better, but the Kalphite King is weak to arrows during its magic phase. In all classes, I use a Unicorn as my familiar. At the time I'm making this guide, Steel Titans are not viable. Also remember that in every phase, I use the Turmoil level prayer that relates to the combat style I'm using. As far as auras go, your best aura is probably going to be Penance, especially if you're using a Spirit Shield. I personally don't use one, mainly because you don't really need it, because even though you're using a shield, you're not really taking that much damage, so a Divine isn't really worth it. To get over there, have your gear on you, and home teleport to the Bedamin camp. Run south and you'll find yourself at the Hive. If it's your first time visiting, run around the lair until you get to the Kalphite King's hole and clear the tunnel. From now on, you can crawl through this and it will shorten up the process of getting there significantly. Now it's time to get into the actual fight. Someone on your team is going to have to create an instance. Don't worry about the limitations like the combat level, because in most cases people aren't going to crash you. If it's your first time, you might want to set the spawn to like the slowest one. But I personally set mine to quick, and once you have it set, tell the rest of your team to get in. It will always spawn in the same spot on screen now, and it will always start off in the melee phase. Note that when I say the melee phase, I mean that the Kalphite King is using melee attacks, and same thing goes with range and magic. Once it spawns, you want to have your taker on one side, and have the rest of your team on the other. The first thing your team needs to do is make sure it's on the tanker. To do this, the tanker needs to use Provoke. The Kalphite King will be weak to fire spells in this phase. If you have drygores, use those. Otherwise, stick to magic attacks and abilities with Void. You can tell it's in melee phase because its wings will be yellow. On this phase, attackers want to use combo abilities like Assault and Havoc to do as much damage as they can in a fast amount of time. In this phase, you want to use Berserk, but be careful as by the time you get to full adrenaline, it'll usually charge right then. As a tanker, it's your job to make sure the Kalphite King is focused on you at all times. Unless you have drygore, Just focus on surviving rather than doing damage. If the Kalphite King starts to flash and stops attacking you, step away, as this is a charge attack and it could hurt you pretty bad. It will also hit anyone standing in line of it. It will never charge diagonally. The tanker should always pray melee during this phase. Attackers should be praying soul split. Like I said before, the provoker is one of the more crucial roles when it comes to the Kalphite King. Look carefully at the attack on screen now. It will start off by doing a stun animation around the tank, and then fire a small but fairly noticeable green orb. Whoever it attacks with this green orb will become completely greened and stunned. At this point, the provoker needs to provoke the Kalphite King onto himself and use Resonance, Barricade, or Immortality. This will negate the Kalphite King's one-hit KO. Resonance is the most useful as it will heal you to full life points, but this comes with its risks, as each time the Kalphite King loses 1/4 of his hit points, he will spawn minions. If you use Resonance and a minion hits you, you'll die. A good trick to use is to use Provoke, and then Immortality, and then Resonance. If a minion hits you, you'll be saved by Immortality, and if it doesn't hit you, then you'll just be healed. The provoker wants to pray either melee or soul split, depending on how fast the tank provokes it back onto himself. Once the Kalphite King has done the animation for his one-hit KO attack, the tanker should provoke the Kalphite King back onto himself and continue like normal. Beware of burrows. The Kalphite King will rise onto its hind legs and burrow into the ground. After a few seconds, it will come up under whoever was tanking when it burrowed. This attack always has the same timing, so it's easy to master. After a minute or two, it will switch to either its ranged or magic phase. First, I'll go over its ranged phase. You can tell it's in ranged phase because its wings will be green. On this phase, everyone should be praying ranged. People without Drygore want to switch to melee void and Azami spear. Be careful because on this phase it will heal a lot. When it has a red sphere around it, it will heal close to what it hits, and when it has a green sphere, it'll heal whatever you hit it. Make sure you don't attack when it has a green sphere unless you're the provoker. If you're the provoker, you always want to stay on the Kalphite King in case he does a green attack. Try to stay on it and don't use combat abilities. If you have Drygores, this will be an easy kill and you can take it down much faster than any other phase. Besides these, most of the phase will be the same as the melee phase. It will stun you a lot, so you may want to use freedom if you find yourself stunned for a long time. In this phase, it will also do ranged attacks on everyone, not just the tank, and some of these can be bleed effects. The last phase I'll cover, which is by far the most dangerous, is the magic phase. The tank does not matter in this phase as all of its attacks will be area of effect and it will not turn a player green. You can tell it's in range phase because of its wings. The wings will be blue. The Kalphite King will launch blue and orange balls at where a player is standing when it starts the animation. People without Drygores want to spread out from each other and avoid the balls at all costs. With Drygores, you're going to want to build up your adrenaline and try to use Massacre. However, when you use it, try to do it after it burrows, because when it goes to burrow, it'll cancel out the effect. A good tip for this phase is pay very close attention to the color of the balls. All orange balls that come after a blue ball attack will hit once and use the combust effect. The blue balls will sometimes stun you. It can hit you fairly high, so be careful and always keep freedom available until you absolutely need to use it. The blue attacks are unavoidable, however the orange balls will stay on the ground, disappear for a moment, then explode, and can hit you for massive damage. If you ever die at the Kalphite King, it will be mostly to these attacks. So now that I've covered all the classes and phases of the Kalphite King, it's time for some general tips. If your entire team has Drygore, you can probably 3-man it with little to no problems, but if most of your team is using Void, you're going to want as many people as you can get. I would suggest at least 6. Frenzy seems to have a very odd effect on this boss. If it's not healing when you use it, it will start healing immediately. If it's healing when you use it, it'll barricade and become invulnerable for a few moments. And if you kill it with a frenzy attack, it will use the ability Immortality and gain 1/3 of his life points back. I've heard that Unload has the same effect, but I've personally never tested it. In this clip, I accidentally opened the developer's console instead of hitting 1 for freedom, so I wound up dying. When you die, get a unicorn pouch and bring enough food that will fill up your inventory while bearing in mind what is in your grave. This way, you don't have to run all the way there and then teleport to a bank and then run there again. It can be annoying and tedious, so making it as short as possible is great. Remember that if you don't protect your armor, you'll still be your base life points when you equip your armor from the grave interface, and usually 3 or 4 rocktail will be enough to heal you to full. If you do get a drop and you're not sure what to sell it for, join the French chat Drygore PCs and you can get a reliable price check. Like I said, I've been doing Kalphite King for over 1,000 kills, and this is what I feel is the fastest way to do it. Don't be afraid to do it in Void with some friends. That's how we started out, and now my entire team has Drygore Rapier sets. So that's it for my Kalphite King guide. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.